Hello, Father Murr. It's Tuesday, August 8th, 2023, and I'm happy to be talking again with you.
And I'm even happier to be talking to you, Robert.
We have a few people who are live with us, and someone has just written, Tess has written hi from Ireland.
Glory be
And
and the saints be praised.
we have Kevin Vogel, J. Kevin Vogel, hello from North Idaho.
Very good.
David Pearson, and I am in
Oh,
Louisiana.
David. I know David is a good guy. Yes.
All right.
I haven't heard from him in a long time, but hello, David.
And Bill Zupancic, hello from Western Washington. So
Oh,
glad to be back with Father Murr and Robert. Well, thank you, Bill. And Stephanie, greetings from Germany. Thank you, Stephanie. Rafaela, hello from Michigan. So we have a number in the United States, but some also in Europe. And
Ramsgate, United Kingdom, and Hearns.
Ramsgate, I've been there, and that's down near the very corner point there on the side of England facing France. Oh, Marcel Hartel, greetings from Switzerland. But Ramsgate,
Oh, all over the world, huh?
yeah. Well, Ramsgate is where Saint Augustine landed to reconvert or to convert England in the late 590s. Tyler from Ontario, Canada. Well, we're very honored and privileged to have this group, and I think we're all in this together. John Middleton, God bless, from Motherwell, Scotland. Okay. And Hippocratic Oath, hello from Costa Rica, rich coast. So, Father Murr, we've got a little community. It's a global community.
It's good. It's good.
And our main purpose truly is to seek the truth in love and to seek the salvation of souls, starting with our own. But which means that we have to try to get through to stay the narrow way and get through the narrow gate, because wide is the way that leads to destruction.
That's right. Right.
So our
The
society,
road to perdition is wide, right?
right? And there's so many things. I want to talk about what is good, what is joyful, and we have some type of telephone call.
Yeah, I have some type of telephone issue and I don't know what to do with it.
Okay.
But that's it. We'll just have to wait. Good. He gave up. He gave up. Good.
He gave up. No, so we speak, in the prayers of the Rosary, there are joyful, sorrowful, and glorious. The joyful prayers speak of the coming of Christ into the world, starting with the Annunciation to Mary that he would be born, and continuing with her. She hastens to Elizabeth, and then he's born on Christmas Day. He's presented in the temple, and he's found again as he's beginning to preach to the priests in the temple. But and his parents leave him there. He's all alone. But the joy of him coming into the world, and then the sorrow of him passing through these terrible passion, where he's arrested, condemned, accused of being a blasphemer, and executed, and he dies on the cross. And the glorious mysteries, as something happens unexpected, unprecedented. We actually believe it's a kind of recreation of the whole universe. There's a new universe created on Easter morning. It's a kind of redo or reset, we might call it, of reality in the first Easter morning, his resurrection, and then his ascension and the coming of the Holy Spirit, and then the crowning of Mary as the Queen of Heaven. So it's as if the heart of our prayer and of our devotion is a mixture of joy, of sorrow, and then of glory. And our lives have those characteristics as well. And if we speak and say we are only a resurrection people and we leave aside the cross, we are making a mistake. Or if we say we are oriented entirely on the cross, the way of the cross, the via crucis, and we leave aside the glory of the resurrection, we also would be incomplete. But our church today seems to be in a grave crisis in losing its breadth, its focus on holiness, its memory, its tradition, and its understanding of its mission for the future. It's a very difficult problem, and I wanted to ask for your advice on how the church could recalibrate, in a sense, its understanding of its mission today in order to help people and to confront the great evils of our time.
Wow. Yeah, that's a question. I guess I would start this way. I would politely disagree with you.
Oh, okay.
All right, the gloves are off or on, whatever. No, I would disagree with this. The church at large is in crisis. I think our hierarchy is in crisis. I agree with that. I think there's a crisis of faith in a great number of cardinals, bishops, priests, deacons. I see it. They're all of a sudden we're comfortable with talking about everything about the earth, everything about this life, of psychology. And I have a great respect for real psychology, but psychology has replaced theology. We don't talk about heaven or hell any longer. I can't remember the last time I heard. I mean, I look for things to listen to, especially on YouTube. There's some fantastic programs on YouTube. But aside from that, nobody talks about heaven or hell. I've gone to many funerals and wakes, as you have, Robert. My goodness, everybody's in heaven, and most of them are playing golf. This is we're lacking a whole thing of faith. But this is where I disagree. That's not the church. Okay, that's not the church. Those are the figures that we see in the church, the hierarchy I see, the priests I see, the nuns I see, right? But that's not the church. There are a tremendous number of people, laity especially, and I'm excited for this. I really am. Laity who are absolutely gung-ho for their faith and making a new start of Catholicism in many parts of the world. They really are. There are new smaller parishes, but opening up, groups of people getting together for traditional masses, for traditional devotions, communities coming together. So I think that part of the church, which I think is the real mystical body of Christ, that's where it's happening. This is where charity is being practiced. This is where people are learning their faith. So many people have asked me, what can we do? What can we do in this time of crisis? Nobody would doubt that we're in a time of crisis, okay? What do? Learn your faith. That's what you do. That's absolutely important, to learn your faith, and of course to pray. But we have been, and I think you would agree with this, Robert, for 50, almost 60 years, in a wave of ignorance on theological matters, on religious matters. That's incredible. If you talk to young people, I'm in my 70s, so there are most of people are younger people, right? But I can speak to people who are 50, 40, 30, 20, 50. They have no idea of their religion. I mean, very little.
Well, let's take a couple of central points here.
All right.
What is the first point of the faith?
The first point of the faith is, I'll tell you this. This is a good thing. The simplest and quickest act of faith of a Catholic is in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. That is the reduction of the credo. That's it in its basic form, right? However, we also have the creed. And if people would just go through the creed that we recite every Sunday and on solemnities at Mass, the Nicene Creed or even the Apostles' Creed, the creed, what do we believe? Those are all the points of what we believe. And I don't know that we've given much serious thought to what we believe. That's just it. I believe in God, one God, in three divine persons, right? Each point of the creed, each point of the creed merits its own book. I mean, these are heavy points, and it's taken 20 centuries to really put everything that we believe together. It's a magnificent thing. The problem is that most people are ignorant of their faith. That's really a problem.
Well, we have Steve Rana writing, the primary purpose of the faith is the salvation of souls.
Absolutely.
But if we were to really look at this sentence where he says the faith is the salvation of souls, those last words are in 2023 rejected or ignored by many, many, many millions of people. And at the same time, deep down, there remains, despite the rejection or ignoring, a profound longing for a return to these words. And therefore, I'm going to just look at them again. Salvation, which means to save or to be somehow brought back from destruction, and of souls. And I say that souls is rejected or ignored because it's quite common in 2023 for people to say, we have no souls. It's a silly concept. And therefore, I start at the very beginning where we do say and believe that the primary purpose of the faith is the salvation of souls. And yet, we find ourselves in the peculiar predicament of not even knowing what the words mean in the general society. The society doesn't feel the need to be saved from anything except poverty, ill health. It doesn't know what the soul is or if we even have souls. And it certainly doesn't generally think that the soul can be judged and condemned for the evil that it embraces. It doesn't believe that that's important. So the essence is that we no longer conceive of ourselves as beings with an eternal dimension. We think of ourselves as creatures with about 70 or 80 years of life, and after that, nothing. And that we may have some karma inside of our lives where if we harm someone or steal from someone, someone might harm us or steal from us. But we don't have a sense that if we are living our lives selfishly, we will be in some way judged for our selfishness. But in the middle of our creed, we say, from whence that Jesus rose and ascended and went to sit at the right hand of the Father, from whence he shall come to judge the living and the dead. In other words, it is a central conception of our faith that we are the type of creatures, the type of beings that have an eternal dimension. That is what is rejected in the last several hundred years by secular humanism, which says there is no other reality beside the reality of time and this world. There is no heaven. It's even in the song by John Lennon, Imagine There's No Heaven.
What a lovely.
So
Robert, I've got some news for you.
Yes.
It's not just the last 300 years in secular thought that the idea of an immortal soul is lacking. We also have it within the church, and that was my first point. We have people, leaders in our church, who fail to believe that. This is a real problem. It is a real problem.
All right.
Therefore, what I'm saying is, and I think this is stunning in the Second Vatican Council when it calls for the laity to take an active part in this whole history of salvation, in their own salvation, in the working of the church, because it's the laity who are going to save the church. I firmly believe that. Fulton Sheen believed that long before the council. I believe that with him. It's the laity. It's not the clergy that's going to save. We keep looking to the clergy for example, and unfortunately, we're not finding it. But there's the thing too here. Look, I think it's very simple. Every living thing has a soul. Does a dog have a soul? Yes. Does a plant have a soul? Yes. Can it move? Can it grow? Can it develop? Yes, it has a soul. Soul is the fount of movement. We have a great saying in Spanish. It's one of the first sayings that I learned in Spanish because I thought it was just so neat. Such a neat expression is ánimo, and it means cheer up. It means be happy. Come on along, get happy, right? That kind of thing. You say ánimo, or anímate, get happy. And it comes from soul. It comes from movement. Move it or lose it. It's that idea of movement. So we all have souls. This is what a cadaver does not have, and a living body does have. There is no movement, and there is movement. All right. This is it. Now, where we have a problem is now anybody who denies a soul, well, good for you. Then you explain what life is. I don't know how you would explain what life is or where you get motivation for life. But the point is, the real problem is that soul immortal? That's the real problem, I guess, philosophical problem and theological problem. Psychology, I love this, Robert. You know what psychology is? Psychology is literally the study of the soul.
Right? Psyche.
Psyche is soul or mind. That's exactly what it is. And let me just throw in another tidbit. This is all free, Robert. I won't charge you at the end. This is all free. There's a great thing. I had my thesis with Dr. Paul Vitz and Dr. Barry Cohen from NYU just printed, and it's about it's about
congratulations.
Thank you. It's about human love, right? I love love. I love love. I love the theme of it. That's why I love God so much, because that's what He is, right? However, here the thing is this: when I was researching just the word, I was trying to write an intro. Aristotle has the same name for soul, psyche, as he does for butterfly. Butterfly in Greek is also psyche, right? Isn't that fantastic? And he said, why in the world would that be? And I think I couldn't find this out though. I can't really completely establish it, but I think it's because the butterfly from the caterpillar to the butterfly is a metamorphosis that resembles the flight of our soul from death to a new life on a higher plane. I really believe that. But anyway, just reel me in when I get too far out, Robert. You have to reel me in.
Well, I like this. I believe that the fact that we speak together, you and I, and that others are hearing us and judging us and weighing us and criticizing us is the highest thing that human beings can do, in the sense that no one else among the animal kingdom are debating over their identity and their nature. And so it seems to me, and I studied this question for some time, that the distinction is that we are the creatures not only who know, but who know that we know.
Yes.
And so, say a dog knows that he wants to or she wants to chase a ball, but the man knows that he desires that or knows that he wants that, and observes himself, as it were, from outside himself or from deep within himself, and therefore has consciousness. And this is a mystery. It's related to the mystery of the soul. It's related to the mystery of freedom of mind. It's related to the question of artificial intelligence, which is entirely programmed. I would say it's spiritual intelligence, because the person receives the Holy Spirit, the person receives the Logos, the person enters into communion with Christ in the Eucharist, the person enters into communion with another through sacrificial love, and that love can be professed as eternal. These are things which aren't on the spectrum of non-human behavior. We are on the level of the soul, of the spirit, and the problem with our society is that the very first thing the society wants to do is to take away that dignity. It wants to diminish the burden on human beings of being souls and say, don't worry about it. You're not that dignified. You're just a bunch of chemicals. You have certain desires.
Well, but that has to be, society has to do that, Robert, if they're going to control us. You can't control a group.
This is what I'm.
You can't control a group of people telling each one that he has dignity.
Well, this is what I'm driving at.
Exactly. I agree.
I'm saying that, actually Christianity starts with the word Christ. Christianity has something to do with Christ. And what it has to do with is becoming like Christ, turning ourselves in some way through suffering and sacrifice, through the cross, through the Eucharist, through prayer, through desire, through pilgrimage, into something that we are not yet, if we are simply secular creatures. In other words, to set our goal toward eternity, that our final destiny will be beyond death. And Christians proclaim this because they proclaim the resurrection. And for 2,000 years they've done this. But the general society says this is silly. It's mistaken. It's illusionary, illusion. And therefore, so many of the other things that we then say about our longing to identify with Christ are also regarded as illusion, as foolishness. Therefore, our first step is to restore the conviction that we are incredibly important, dignified creatures insofar as we exist, and that having come into existence, our decisions and our choices have an eternal consequence, whether we choose good or evil, whether we oppress or set free, whether we darken or enlighten, whether we love or hate. What do you think, Father?
Well, you finally got to it. You finally got to it, because the key word, I think, in all of this is love. And I think that the reason people don't believe in the soul, don't believe in God, and I mean this sincerely, is because they have never loved. I don't know anyone who has ever loved, I mean loved one other person, loved. Be willing to give your life for that person. Love, that kind of love. Find your identity in that other person and he or she in you. I don't know anyone who has ever loved who denies God.
Father Murr,
You can't deny God. You can't deny God because God is love. That's what you're talking about. That's exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, so you're sounding in some way like an eternal romantic.
No. Romantics are silly. They're silly, and they get caught up in the senses and this and the other thing. No, there is an intellectual base to everything that I'm saying, and you touched on one great part of it, which is will, freedom. Right? Here's the thing: God created something created. Right? I believe we call this God. Right? Aquinas. I love Aquinas when he goes on and he will talk about a philosophical argument, and at the end he says, "And this we call God." Right? This we call God. I call God. I don't know what the world calls it, but the point is this: someone created us with a capacity to love and to be loved.
Yeah.
To love and to be loved. Every human being has that. I have seen, I told you not too long ago about Jeffrey, that little boy in the crib. Remember?
No, yeah.
Anyway,
no, explain that again. Explain it again because people forget.
I went to an orphanage once run by some sisters in the United States, and this baby, about 8 months old, if I'm not mistaken, was in this crib, and the baby's head was at about 2 feet long, and the body very tiny, and there were tubes in and out of this poor child, and the eyes were back and forth, and I looked at this, and I was so caught me by surprise to begin with. And I was so moved and disturbed by what I was seeing that I said out loud what I was thinking. I didn't mean to say it out loud. I said, "Why would God permit such a thing?" And the nun standing right next to me, a traditional nun, beautiful woman dedicated to that child and to all of these children her entire life, she said, my question was, why would God permit such a thing? And she answered calmly and quietly, so that I could become a saint, said she. God did this so that I could become a saint. It's my life to take care of him. He's my salvation. He's my salvation. It's fantastic. I was absolutely humiliated. I humiliated myself. I couldn't, that was the perfect answer. And that I didn't feel it immediately, I felt bad for me. I felt bad because I should have been more mature. But the point was this: that little boy, when I say completely out of it, you just had to see and be there. When I touched his hand, he grabbed my finger. He knew how to receive love. And in his own small, tiny way, was giving back love. This is fantastic. This is something that we're born with, to love and to be loved. This is the whole deal. This is the whole deal. Now, what I'm saying is this, and I know this sounds like a great generalization, and maybe it even sounds wild. It doesn't matter. I believe it. The people who don't believe in God don't believe in love. And the people who don't believe in God don't tell me that they have loved, because they have not. Because when you love, there are times that you are outside of space and time. You are already experiencing something of eternity in loving. This is fantastic. You know you have a soul because you feel it. You're aware of it. You know with it, and you love with it. So this, and I think what you're talking about, Robert, is very good, and it's a great observation. But what has gone down in our society for the past 2 or 3 centuries? The very idea of love. Look where commitment is. There's no commitment. People don't bother today to even get married because they're afraid to commit. They don't want to commit. Narcissism, here's a good thing for psychologists. I remember Paul Vitz, he made me laugh one time. We were talking about narcissism, and Paul Vitz says, he said, Charles, you and I are in the most narcissistic city in the world. We're in New York City. This has got to be the center of narcissism. He said, I've been practicing psychology for over 40 years. To this day, this is great observation. To this day, and narcissism is a personality disorder. It's a disorder. He said, to this day, no one has ever come to me to say, I'm a narcissist, please help me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because why? Because success, according to our Western standards, depends on narcissism. You've got to be selfish. You've got to have drive. You've got to abandon your family, abandon your wife, abandon all the career, keep going, money, power, influence. It's incredible. But where is love in all of that? Here's my point. We get back to this. Where is love in all of that? It has gone by the wayside. If you can tell me, I talk to young people who have been married for 2 years and they're divorced. The ones who even bother to marry, right? Which is going lower every day. They're divorced after 2 years because they had an argument. Or I don't feel anything. Well, if love is based on feeling, forget it. If fidelity, loyalty, those traits don't enter into it, this is why you're saying a romantic doesn't look at the structure of love. I love the structure of love. Love has a structure. Love has rules. It has rules and it has a structure. That's my whole point. And a romantic doesn't look at that. You can fall in love, fall out of love. Somebody asked me, had I ever fallen in love? And I said, fallen in love? Not really. I stepped in it a couple times. I never felt it, right? But this whole thing of love is the worth of the soul. The soul. What is a beautiful Cantique de Noël, Minuit Chrétien. It's the Christmas. Oh, Holy Night. Oh, Holy Night.
Oh,
right? One beautiful line of that.
Yeah.
When he appeared, and the soul felt its worth. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Well, this is it. If you want the soul to feel its worth, love.
Okay, Father Murr, you've got us now to the edge here of the interface between the human person and the reality of the church, the faith, the sacraments, the prayers, the liturgies, the vocations. And that interface seems to be the question of worth. What has value? The soul knew its worth and therefore could no longer regard itself as disposable, worthless, lost, but a soul has been considered worthy of the death of the Son of God to save it from meaninglessness, from darkness, from condemnation, from roaming around aimlessly toward nowhere or everywhere. And this role of the church in giving worth to the soul seems to be where we've arrived at now. Does that seem to be the truth to you, that the church speaks to the slaves of the Roman Empire or to the indebted middle and lower middle class of the 21st century. It speaks to women, it speaks to men, it speaks to slaves, and it says you have worth. You have supreme dignity, and it speaks even to the unborn and to the old, and it speaks even to the people with genetic deformities. Each creature has worth, and then receiving that sense of worth in our gratitude, in our thanksgiving, in our joy, we are enabled and freed to love and to give and commit the self that we have been given to others, to God and to others. This seems to be the essence of our faith.
You, Robert, and I, and everyone listening to us was made in the image of God. What does that mean? Does that mean that God has 10 fingers and 10 toes and a nose? No, of course not. That's making God in my image, right? The image of God I am made in. The image of God. And what is the image of God that I'm made in? The image of God that I'm made in is free will. God is free will. God is free to create or not create. That's his free choice. I am made with free will for what purpose? I'm made for, listen to this. I'll tell you, this is how crazy this gets. I was given free will to love, to choose someone, to find someone, to commit to someone, and to love that person. That's why I was given free will. I can only love freely. I cannot be forced to love. You can put a gun to my head and say, tell me you love me. And if I want to live a little bit longer, I'll say I love you. But it's not true because you've taken away my free will. I can only love. Love is an act of will, and it's a free will. I get a kick out of the people in the 1930s. I just watched a documentary. I know I'm all over the place, Robert. I keep telling you, reel me in.
Well, I'm going to, but tell us.
I just watched a documentary on F. Scott Fitzgerald, a man from St. Paul, Minnesota, where I was born, and his wife Zelda. I'm listening. I'm listening to this, and I knew a lot about him before. And of course, I've read The Great Gatsby and what have you in high school. One of the most narcissistic, selfish people I've ever come across. Just absolutely. And there was no room for him in his life for God. Well, I don't find that surprising at all. If a salt shaker is full of salt, it can't be full of pepper. The space is already occupied. If I'm full of me, I'm containing the space. The space is occupied. You can't put anything else in. These are narcissistic, selfish people, and it stands to reason that they don't believe in God. How could they? There's no room. There's no room. It's occupied by self. Now, we get to this. This is the great thing of the will, of free will. I could go on about this, and I can easily, but so I'll keep it short.
Okay.
Free will is, love isn't free, okay? Love is not free. Love costs something. Everything costs something. There's a cost to everything, and there's a cost to love. When you love, you have to give up that freedom that you have. You give that to the other person. That other person gives up his or her love, freedom to you. This is what it's for. The freedom that I have, the free will that I have, is the coinage, if you will, for that transaction. It's that transaction. I have it to give it away. I don't have it to keep it. That's not the idea. And when I keep it, I become just a selfish, miserable human being. And the world is full of these people, and they're unhappy, and they can't figure out why they're unhappy. They don't get it. They don't get it. I've, maybe this won't surprise you too much, but I have a lot of people. I'm kind of I think a happy person. I've always been. I have a lot of people who come up to me. What are you
Father
happy
Murr,
for? What are you
Father
happy?
Murr,
Yes.
Father Murr. Catherine
Yes.
says, "I'm so glad I caught you this morning."
Catherine, well, I'm glad you caught me too, from South Africa. Good. Now, where am I? Just a minute.
You're a happy person.
Where was I before I got caught by Catherine?
You're a happy person.
Yeah, I'm a happy person. They're asking, why are you happy? Why is there joy in you? Why? How could there not be? How could there not be? I've loved in my life. I've given up my life in love. I've received so much love and real love from people. I believe in God who is love, and that's where I'm going. Why wouldn't I be happy? But if I'm all caught up with myself,
okay.
I had in New York so many young people come up to me. They're suffering with depression. Now, this is not across the board thing, all right? So I'm speaking just generally. What do we do for depression? What do we do? I listen to them. Well, tell me more about it. They sit in their rooms, never leave their rooms, and expect to be waited on. Food should be brought into them, and they're just miserable. Can't figure it out. I said, well, here, come with me to the nursing home. I've got 25 elderly people who would love to talk to you, and you'd love to talk to them. Here, come with me on my rounds to the hospital. There are a lot of people who are in pain who would love to have somebody like you sit down with them. No, can't do that. Can't do that. Well, then good. Then continue being in your state of depression. You've got to get out of it, right?
Father Murr, what you've just said seems to be a kind of conclusion that the loneliness, the misery, the depression that so many experience can be caused by too great focus on oneself, not getting out of oneself, and not going in any way to act charitably towards old people, towards children, towards people who are sick, people who are in despair themselves, and that process somehow restores the life of your own soul.
It does. It absolutely does.
But I also wanted to just bring up the question of our somehow much criticized church. The church is too oppressive. The church is too corrupt. The church has so many flawed personalities among the priests, among the nuns, and among the laity as well. Every one of them is either interested in a little petty kingdom, petty power, petty authority. Where is Christ in all of this? I still feel from my parents, from my father and mother, that being brought to church and sort of looking up and toward the highest, the deepest, the most profound, the most holy, was somehow a great gift to me. And if the church was put into concentration camps and eliminated by Hollywood or by the internet or canceled, we would be in a terrible state. How can we move from this conversation about the dignity of the soul and the desire of the church to save souls to the malaise of the church today? How can the church carry out her wonderful role? And what is her problem in doing so as we speak in August of 2023?
I would start this way. I've heard this, of course, for years. As you have heard this for years, we're all hypocrites. We're not living what we're supposed to be living. There's duplicity. Yeah, you're right. Thank God none of that exists in the world, huh? Thank God none of that exists in the world. Just in the Catholic Church that exists. We are 1.2, if I'm not mistaken, 1.2 billion with a B people in the church. 1.2 billion. In a number like 1.2 billion people, you're going to have some problems. I don't know if that ever occurred to anybody. You're going to have some problems. All right. Now, it's like this too. I've said this to the Carmelite sisters. I was their chaplain for years in San Francisco. Look, in every convent, there are saints and there are saint makers. Right? There are nuns who are absolute saints, and there are other nuns who make the saints because you have to live with them. Right? You've got the two things going on: saints and saint makers. Well, we all have that going on, and inside each one of us, there's a saint and there's a saint maker. There's a saint and there's a problem. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This goes on. It's the dynamic of life. You have to have this. You have to have this to keep living. We're bouncing back and forth from this, that, and the other, and keeps us alive and keep things interesting. Holy sandpaper. That's good.
Well, I think our teaching has given us the perspective, if we can remember it and hold on to it. We know by our faith that we have great dignity. We also know that we can be narcissistic, we can be sinful, we can be the prodigal son, we can run away to Babylon. We see everybody being tempted by this or that, whether it's alcohol or money and we realize often how silly it all is. We see someone give up their whole life to get a few pieces of paper, green dollars, and they've given up the most beautiful things they might have had, especially.
Robert, let me just throw this in too. Just something that should be said. You have no idea how many people you walk by in the street every day who are on drugs. Right? So we're talking about a whole society that is really not using this too much and not using this too much, but we're controlled by drugs. A lot of people. I mean, there's a great percentage, almost 50% of the American population, for example, is taking drugs. I mean, strong drugs that affect the way of thinking.
Yeah.
This is also another problem. So we've got all of these problems. However, we've also got solutions. You began this by asking a liturgical question, and I'd like to address that, because we have a lot of people who are very upset with things liturgical today. We have a pope who's upset about things liturgical today. All right, good.
Yeah.
You just described something that I thought, when I was listening to, I could identify with beautifully. Your parents took you to Mass. They took you to worship God. You worshiped God. You worshiped God, and you received from God his own body, blood, soul, and divinity in Holy Communion. That, for the most part, stopped 50 years ago. And rather than worshiping God, we turned in on ourselves. This is exactly the problem we're talking about with narcissism. It's communal narcissism. We turned in on ourselves. The community turned in. We all hold hands and we make a circle. That's not it.
Yeah.
That's not worshiping God. That's not worshiping God.
You're absolutely right. I think we've reached a conclusion.
And we become tired of that. Yeah.
I agree. I think we've begun to understand in some partial way what they tried to do at the Second Vatican Council and in the years after, as there was a kind of war between those who wanted to carry it very far forward and others who wanted to restrain. But what they intended to do, what they said they wanted to do, was to make the message of Christ, the person of Christ, more available to the world, rather than keep him somehow in the sacristy, in the liturgy. And then instead, they actually fell short of their goal in the most the most silly way.
Mm-hmm.
And they made the 1970s the standard for the eternal church. And even the present Pope and the circle around him somehow are looking back to the 70s and the 60s as a supreme tradition. And
Amazing. It is amazing. You're
it's
right.
kind of a time warp.
Yeah.
And I think only now in 2023 and these coming years will we finally escape that 60 years, or it's getting close to 70 years, 62 to 2032 will be 70 years. So we're 9 years away. So we're 61 years since the beginning of the Second Vatican Council, where they wanted notionally to not have neurotic, externalistic, a closed church and liturgy, and they wanted to open it up, and then they closed it right back up again on a kind of secular, humanistic barrier against the divine, the eternal, the holy, and they didn't realize that
And
they've done that.
with just a sprinkling of neurotic also.
A sprinkling of neurotic
Yes.
with the narcissistic circles.
Right.
And the almost, yeah, there's no doubt that there could have been and there were things that could be addressed. There were immaturities in some way, but there also were profound riches as the church, mother and teacher, mater et magistra, was telling people how to navigate through this world according to the lodestar of orienting oneself toward eternity, toward the great dignity that each of us has. And this dignity somehow was diminished. And people said, just let everything go, let it all hang out. Don't attempt to that long and lonely journey towards self-control or self-discipline or self-denial. Am I correct?
And you're absolutely correct. And what did we end up with?
We ended up being so self-obsessed,
yes,
and so out of control that we couldn't take that that wonderful moment where you find in every great story where someone has got a choice to make between self and other, and the courageous and beautiful choice that is made by the saint or by the hero is not being made in our society. It's the choice now to fulfill yourself, do it what you want. It's not sacrificing yourself for the sake of some higher good, which is the heroic act in every great story, in the story of every great life. And we held this up to everyone in the church, the simplest person. And this was our tradition. And it's somehow slipped through our fingers now. And I think this is what we're trying to recover.
Well, look, I'll tell you this. Cardinal Robert Serra, at the beginning of this pontificate, announced, and I could not believe what I was reading when I was reading it. He announced that with the Holy Father's permission and approval, on the first Sunday of first Sunday of Advent, this was in the first year of the pontificate or second year, the masses would be celebrated ad orientem. You remember that?
Yes.
Right. I almost fell off my chair. I couldn't believe it.
Ad orientem means toward the east. Ad orientem.
For those who are more negative thinking, with the priest gives his back to the people.
Right.
It's not that the priest is giving his back to the people. The priest is giving his face to God. Right? I told you my grandmother used to say, well, wouldn't you like to, said that the priest turned around and was facing the people at Mass. And she said, well, I certainly hope that the bus driver doesn't do the same thing. Anyway,
Father, I'd like you to just tell us about then the question of vocation, the question of a calling. Vocare means to call. Vocation is a calling. And
Vocation means, I was just thinking of that when you were talking. It means, I think, three basically different things from 1950 to 1970 and 80s to today. In the 1950s, it was a calling to a heroic life, a life of sacrifice. You were giving all of yourself, your total self, a commitment to God and to the people of God. And we all knew priests and religious who were shining examples of that. And these were incredible men and women that it's a shame the world didn't have time for them then either. Right? So let's be real. But they were heroes and heroines. They really were. In the 1970s, with the liberty of everything, freedom of everything, and don't get hung up on anything, and you're free to this, free to that. Anybody who had a vocation, a calling, was looked on as that's kind of too bad that he couldn't have a normal life. Yeah. And today, a vocation, a calling, that is to say, where does the calling come from? The calling is not coming from the community. That's nonsense. The calling is coming from God. The calling is a voice, an interior voice that calls. It is the voice of God that each one of us has in his conscience. You know, this is what you're called toward. You grow in that knowledge. You're not born with, you just know. It happens over time, and you answer that calling. Today, that calling is mocked. It's simply mocked. It's a mockery. But that's the problem of the world, Robert. That's not our problem. That's the world's problem. Because we're called to the same vocation from the 1950s and 1970s to today. It's the same vocation, the priesthood, the religious life, but also the married life. Marriage is a magnificent vocation, and people are called to that vocation. Who's listening to that? We talk about the lack of priestly vocations today. The lack of priestly vocations. How about the lack of married vocations? How about that? This is outrageous, you know?
Well, yeah, what you've referred to is the calling. It's as if we have to have ears that can hear a voice from eternity speak to us and say, if you come toward this voice, you will fulfill your deepest nature. And you heard that calling and you became a priest. I wonder if you can describe how you heard that call. And you start to laugh.
No, I can sure tell you how I heard it. I heard it in St. Peter's Square at about midnight. One night in, I think it was 1974, Monsignor Mario Marini and I were walking, and we were walking and talking. It was fantastic. To talk to him was what a privilege. I mean, really, what a privilege to have somebody like that in your life. Anyway, we went over the Ponte Sant'Angelo, and we're coming up to the Via della Conciliazione and into St. Peter's Square. And the bell rang out 11 o'clock at night. I remember that. And at that time, I was giving him my general confession. A general confession, for those of you who don't know what that means, it's a confession of your entire life, from the age of 7, age of knowing right from wrong, to the present. So it's a general confession. When I'd finished, it took a while. He had great patience with me. We were in St. Peter's Square. He gave me and there was no one else in the square. It was absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Just the dim lights on. He gave me absolution, and then he said, "And what about a calling to the priesthood?" There was silence. And I said, "Well, I haven't heard the calling. I haven't heard that calling. Not surely, not for sure." And he turned, and he had this big booming bass voice. He turned and in my ear said, "Charlie Murr, I want you to be a priest." And then he said, "Did you hear that?" I said, I did. He said, well, you just got your calling. I
Hmm.
said, wow. And I really thought about it. I thought about it very seriously, and decided to answer that call. I said, yes. I really felt that was a great grace of God, that not only did he leave it to my conscience, because my conscience wasn't answering too quickly.
Okay.
He actually got this man to be his own voice. And in St. Peter's Square at 11 o'clock at night, resoundingly inviting me to the priesthood. It's kind of a unique story. It's a unique story, but so is the story of my life. It's kind of a crazy thing. It is.
Well, I think that's a beautiful story, and I think each of us has a comparable story in one form or another, something that either a friend or a passage in a book we're reading, or our father or our mother, or the equivalent of Monsignor Marini says to us, you can be this, or you could be this, or you might consider this, or you should consider this. And suddenly life is opening up with meaning and with commitment. And is that what you felt, that you could give your whole
Yeah,
life?
Robert, we used to have a saying. People don't use it so much any longer. It dawned on me.
It dawned on
you. Right? It dawned on me. Like the sun rose. Oh my goodness, this is what's around. I couldn't see it before. It dawned on me. When I heard that invitation, it really dawned on me that yes, and I answered positively to that. Yeah.
And then you've had a life time as a ordained priest of God.
I have, and let me just say this too. I just had a couple here from Florida who came for mass on Sunday. Great people, and they mentioned a couple times how they liked listening to me on YouTube's and on YouTube programs, and you're always so positive, and you're so happy. I said, I'm happy, but believe me, I haven't had an easy life. I have not had an easy life, and neither of you, Robert. None of us have. We just don't show that. But I think this sounds crazy, I know, but I think the greatest reason for which I am happy, I do have a joie de vivre. I have that, is because I've suffered. Because I've suffered. Through suffering, you learn an awful lot. You learn what's really important. You learn who really loves you, who really does not. You learn all sorts of marvelous things about yourself. God, what did Fulton Sheen say? He was quoting someone else, I can't remember who, but he said, God whispers to you in your joys, but shouts to you in your suffering. You can hear his voice very clearly. All right. So I think when any comedian will tell you, any real good comedian will tell you that the secret to his comedy or her comedy was some tragedy in life. There was some tragedy in childhood. There was suffering, and they learned to smile at it. They learned to laugh at it. They learned to turn it around and find the positive in it. That's what humor is, in part, right? Anyway, we're getting off on all sorts of directions all over the place.
Well, I think we've talked about the dignity of the human person. We call that the eternal dignity of the soul. We've spoken of the necessity to save that soul, to not allow it to slip into darkness, but to be illuminated with the light of Christ. That is the role of the church, that the church, through its sacramental system, conforms souls to Christ himself and incorporates them into his life, bringing a foretaste of eternity in this world and a great profound joy. Then the sufferings of this life, you've ended by saying, should not be hated or denounced, but the sufferings in some way should be embraced as an opportunity to go
Embrace the
even
word.
deeper.
Yep.
And that's
You know,
the message.
Robert, may I suggest right now that we jot down an idea for next week, if God grants us life and liberty, and we're around next week.
Good point.
The four last things.
All right.
We should really talk about the four last things, because I think they're not talked about. You know, death, judgment, heaven, and hell. They're certainly worth a program. They're certainly worth considering in a lifetime. Often, that would be a good theme, I think. Don't
All
you?
right. You know what? People may want your blessing, Father. I
Oh, they
wondered
have
if
it.
you-
They have it
What?
with joy, with joy. Benedictio de omnipotent Patris, Filii, Spiritus Sancto, scendit super vos, et manet semper. Amen. God bless you all. God bless you, Robert. Thank you for your patience with me.
It's a joy to work with you, Father, and to speak with you. Thanks to everyone. Please come back next week. Please share this video. Thank you for your support. God bless.
Join us this September on an unforgettable pilgrimage to Lebanon, the land where Christ walked. This is a pilgrimage you won't want to miss. We'll taste world-renowned Lebanese cuisine, drift through underground grottos, and explore the monasteries high above in the mountains and in the deepest valleys on our way to an encounter with the miracle worker, Saint Charbel, in the land where Christ walked. Join us this fall, September 16th through the 25th,